Welcome in, guys. This is the Buried in the Bones podcast, episode 21. Skill over suffering, intelligent training, how we can do better, and what is the antidote to meaningless or purposeless suffering. That's important. Well, in my opinion, it's skill. It's skill-based acquisition, and based on the skills I acquire, I use those to my advantage in life. And the better I get skillfully, the less I am likely to suffer over nuanced and little things. So, not to be confused with meaningful suffering, that is part of the work and the good. All of that's important, but this is, we'll say, purposeless suffering, meaningless, for the sake of doing it and no other reason. So, we'll talk about training specifically in the fitness and strength conditioning world, and maybe answer some questions, talk about what is good training, what is bad training, and issues you might be seeing as an athlete, hobbyist, or, I don't know, artist, musician, anything that requires work, training, and skill. So check it out. In the context of the human body, it's like, why do you keep breaking down? It's like, what are chronic issues? Low back pain, knee pain, maybe ankle pain, we'll say upper back, neck, shoulders, etc. All these are common areas, common issued areas, and but they've been talking to you. They're not random. Talked about it before, but everything's a signal, right? And your training is kind of the primary caretaker. And what is that signal? It delivers you the adaptation. It provides the signal, your body adjusts. So what encompasses most people's training right now? And that's probably a lot of fatigue, a lot of exhaustion, training essentially to survive for the sake of doing it. And it's kind of funny when people will work out with me or something. Beau just loves to make things extremely hard, and it's like, well, how many times do I do that a week? Fucking one. Not every session is hell, and if it is hell, it's a specific adaptation in mind. I rarely now will go and just suffer for the sake of suffering, unless I'm with friends and I want to go get some community. That's about it. So, if you're chasing hard things and you're suffering for the sake of doing it, it might be a good time to just sit down and ask why. Because if not, you're just piling on what is dysfunction. And I'm going to touch on that in just a minute, but just like motor patterns as in movement, if you move a certain way for so long, you're just reinforcing what is dysfunctional movement. And dysfunctional means less efficient. It doesn't mean everyone's supposed to move a very, very specific way. It means that there's a more optimal way to do it based on the human in front of them. So you can't fit people in boxes, and if you try to, then you're wrong. But this is got a couple references for us, and this is from Gavitt. I think it's how you pronounce his name. 2016. And the title was The Training, Injury Prevention Paradox. Should athletes be training smarter and harder? Out of the British Journal of Sports Medicine. So, there's some numbers here, and you guys feel free to go look at these. It gets very nuanced and very specific, so I was too lazy to add every detail in there. But the conclusion was athletes who trained harder and had a higher chronic workload with gradual progression had fewer injuries with those who mixed up their training loads and had inconsistent spikes in intensity. It's kind of interesting, because if you think about that, there's a thing called what is undulating periodization, where you're always changing the stimulus. You're always actually changing the volumes and the sets, and vice versa, and the time domains. And so that is kind of interesting that they concluded that, but it makes sense. If you watched the UFC 2 weeks ago, Ilia Topuria fought Charles Oliveira, and I was like, well, he knocked him out. Ilia is certainly the best mixed martial arts in the world right now, but there was an interview with him, and he talked about the best mixed martial artist in the world, but he was talking about how he trains, and this reminded me of just the the physiology and just the science behind good training. But he was like, I personally take one art at a time and I master it. So I don't train mixed martial arts like a lot of people do. I box and I master boxing. And then I'll go wrestle and only focus on wrestling. And I'll learn the super intricate ways to move and do certain moves within this domain, within this art. And with proper strength conditioning, that's why we have what is like mesocycles or macro cycles. It's periodization essentially. But you'll like go through muscular endurance and hypertrophy, so you're getting your tissues healthy and moving well, and they're conditioning for a higher workload. And then you'll implement some strength on top of that, and then with the strength on top of that, you'll get into like a power and speed phase to take the musculature and the nervous system and just maximize it, right? And then after the season, you'll go through maintenance with mobility and very specific accessories for that specific athlete. And it's called just a needs analysis essentially. But it's just interesting. It's kind of, if this guy, this Ilya guy, if he maximizes each individual, we'll say art form, well, it's like the human body maximizes each individual phase: strength, power, muscular conditioning, mobility, and they change. So it's not necessarily the volume that causes injury. It's like the adaptation. It's the tolerance, the tissue tolerance that you've developed throughout your training, and if you were specific enough and diligent enough with your good training, and usually that will help prevent what is just like soft tissue injuries. In most cases, it's unskilled strength conditioning structure, and it's an inconsistent spike in intensity. It's just too much. So this guy has this next one is actually all these guys are kind of polarizing, but McGill's one of them, and Anderson, and then I actually forgot this guy's name, but he's really big into he's big in the strength conditioning world for MMA. But it's the Biomedical Analysis of Sprinting, Journal of Strength Conditioning Research in 2010. But they concluded that trained athletes with refined sprint mechanics produced greater force with less joint stress, while unskilled movers placed more load on the lumbar spine and hips, increasing risk of injury over time. And so let's unpack that a little bit. The increased injury risk is going to be due to a less or a more inefficient pattern biomechanically. At the end of the day, like our skeleton literally is a bunch of levers and pulleys, right? So what they mean by that is typically when that happens, you have what is this like weaker muscle groups having to compensate for what should be done by greater muscle bellies, bigger muscle bellies, and stronger muscle groups. And usually that compensatory pattern will end up maybe failing at some point. It's not necessarily going to happen. We have a lot of great compensators. As they say, the best athletes are the best compensators. But the world class, like world champions, Olympic sprinters, etc., have maximized their body's ability to have the most efficient pattern. So that's important. But this goes back to this is the philosophical side of it, of course. But in movement, strength conditioning, and movement, we can use that Carl Jung quote. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Until you consciously bring your training, or if you keep unconsciously going through your training and just maximizing your exhaustion and burning yourself out, you will continue to train unconsciously, but you will call it progress, right? So what you've done is you're just like habits, movement is the same way. You reinforce a bad habit. And movement, you move a certain way for so long, and we can fix that. So I've kind of talked shit about it, but what is intelligent training exactly? And this is kind of important, but we're all trying to chase what is the skill, right? The antidote to meaningless suffering in our lives. But what is intelligent training? We're trying to maximize our way to get closer to what is that skill. If you're in strength and conditioning, specifically as an athlete, a field sport athlete, you're trying to maximize your general properties, your general physical properties, strength, power, speed, etc. They're all maximized by biomotor abilities, right? Good training it's mindful, it's progressive, and it's honest. This is where you're at, this is what you need, and let's carry on. For me personally, I think joint integrity and movement comes first. I think movement patterns are way more important. Your most optimized ability to move is way more important than the muscles you choose to develop. Everything else will come. But we need our joint integrity first, and then we need our movement patterns that will help support what is a strong structural system. And then we progress based on that. Kind of said this in baseball that when we have baseball players, and I worked with the MLB players, they'd come in and they're so damn powerful. But it's kind of weird to even say, but some of them it was amazing to see how inefficient, how much more efficient they could be movement wise. And so the idea was you don't add velocity on top of shit, right? Let's restructure this, open up a little bit more joint space, grant you some freedom maybe in your external rotation or your internal rotation to give you a better follow through, or give your body's ability, your spine and hips, a better ability to coil, and you get a lot more power out of it. So, yeah. So good training, man. You need to learn how to control your joint and optimize it. That's skill. It's I've referenced this a lot, it's the easiest thing for me to show you, but a shoulder car, right? Going through adduction of the arm through external rotation, going into shoulder flexion with external rotation. Once you get here, you go through abduction and internal rotation and extension. So that's skill. You have to get your brain's ability, your biomotor abilities, to learn how to maximize joint space, controlling the joint through its entirety, using all the musculature and tissue surrounding it. Once we get the skill of what is joint integrity, we can move on. Train big functional compound patterns. Maybe a bench press or a squat. Maybe some track and field or some turf dynamic work like skippings, jumps, bounds, etc. It's kind of funny because I'm basically breaking down what is an entire strength session for athletes. Go through your mobility and CNS, meaning central nervous system. You wake it up, and then you go learn some skillful, fun athletic movements through that dynamic warm-up. And then we implement that with the structure, with the compound movements and strength. And then depending on the phase of our training, we'll either be focusing intentfully on that and be there for a while, or we'll move on to things that are more necessary. But I actually don't know how to pronounce this next guy's name. Liao Zhu. Saw this, thought it was cute. But in the context of good training, this kind of reminded me of it. In the context of good training, people, will go in like a CrossFit workout's a great example. People go in and just absolutely blister themselves in a workout. It sucks. Everyone's suffering together, and we're huffing and puffing, and we suffered together, and it was beautiful. But he said, nature does not hurry, yet everything is accomplished. Nature does not hurry, yet everything is accomplished. And we can totally apply that to the principles of strength conditioning. I might have mentioned this before, this is my opinion, but training isn't necessarily slow. Or the way you structure it, or if you go in, let's say you're with a professional and he has you jump for 2 sets of 5, and then you do 3 singles at 315 pounds for a squat, or it feels like it's not enough. However, some people will call this the minimal effective dose. So it's not that training is slow, it's just right. And that's what we're looking for. The training is the skill acquisition. It's like learning how to play an instrument. It takes time. But I don't know if anyone here has played like an instrument, but this is kind of interesting how the nervous system adapts. If anyone here has ever played the guitar, I played the guitar, and this is something I have found. I will learn a song viciously for 4 hours. Learn how to play it, finally go through all my frustrations. Meaningful suffering, right? I'm suffering at the sake of acquiring this skill, and then afterwards, I step away and I come back maybe a day later and I pick it up and all of a sudden I'm playing it smoothly. My fingers are finally in place. I'm no longer suffering and struggling to get to the chord that I'm trying to play. That's your nervous system. That is a neural adaptation. And it didn't happen then, and it took its time, but it was the right adaptation to occur. And I really like that quote, man. Nature does not hurry, yet everything is accomplished. Structure. Good training is structured with a demand, purpose, and adaptation in mind. Thought that was pretty cool. So how can this show up in our life? I've mentioned this a lot, but if we're not just training the weights, if we're not just in the fitness world, and it's not just about strength conditioning, because some of you guys don't do very advanced S&C, and that's okay. How's it show up in your life? I think, personally, the story and the body and the person that I'm building internally as I train physically, I think that carries me into like basic moments in my life. And so how is good training also like the skill? And how can that be carried over into my life? Well, it's very small decisions under stress. It's like, how do I regulate myself under stress? How can I intentfully focus when I'm stressed out and pressured? Like in jiu-jitsu, I love jiu-jitsu, it's so fucking awesome. But when you are in jiu-jitsu, and especially when you're new or you're just facing someone who's just that much better than you, it's hard to explain how suffocating and miserable it is to be controlled by somebody else and at the possible expense of your joint being dislocated or broken or you being choked out unconscious. But during those super heightened stressful moments of almost like a fight or flight response, your ability to focus under legitimate physical pressure, but also like psychological pressure, knowing that danger is near. You take that breath, you think for a second, great, I'm going to put my knee here and I'm going to put my forearm right in his hip, and then I'm going to do a escape. I'm going to shrimp out, meaning I'm going to throw my hips to the side and then figure out a way to escape, right? It's adaptability. It's adaptability essentially in chaos. And so those are just basic. It's, you're merging, you're driving your car and you're getting in the merging lane and no one's letting you over, and you got to get there before, you miss your exit. I don't know. Something as little as that is your ability to focus under pressure, make good decisions, and adapt. Maybe you miss your exit and not at the expense of 10 people in your car. You're not going to risk their life to make the exit when there's another one mile down the road. You just turn around. Something as simple as that. This quote last week by Viktor Frankl. When a person can't find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure. In the fitness space, without a deep sense of training and meaning, the pleasure essentially is discomfort, exhaustion, and suffering. borderline masochistic, I guess. CrossFit kind of used exhaustion as like its identity. That's kind of what it identified in. You know, burning yourself out and for suffering through something as a trophy to have, or an identity to wear, or proof that their training methodology is working. And you'll see this, and this is how you know people got confused in what is the identity of CrossFit. One, it's kind of coming to an end, it feels like. High Rocks is taking over. Two, the discrepancy on what is it is one company, founded on like what is its base generalization of programming. But if you go to one CrossFit gym that's decent, and then you go to another one, and you'll like this other gym, and this has, this is funny. Story time. I worked at a place in Phoenix. It was a CrossFit gym. This is really funny, but every workout was essentially exactly the same, and there was volumes in this gym that just didn't make anatomical sense. It had no legitimate adaptation of mind. It was just like a push-pull hinge, 50, 40, 30, 20, 10, 3 exercises, do all of those repetitions. Dave Castro at the time was the coordinator and director of CrossFit strength and conditioning programming for the CrossFit Games. He came into the CrossFit gym when I was coaching. And I was coaching at this place. And I didn't believe in the programming at all. It's hilarious. And this guy essentially didn't create it, but he certainly was like the brains behind it. Behind the CrossFit Games, which is kind of intimidating. And I had to look at this guy who's not very athletic, Dave Castro. He wasn't very athletic. He wasn't like the most physically like gifted guy at all. And I was like, all right, man, we're going to do 5 sets of 3 overheads, full snatch. And then afterwards, we're going to do 50 overhead or handstand push-ups. We're going to do a 400-meter run. We're going to do like power cleans, and we have 30 minutes. It's like no one in the class even reached 30 handstand push-ups. It was so absurd. It was so absurd. But that just speaks to how the identity of CrossFit and coaching, like this place, from what he did, he was like the founder. He was the one with the message. And it was just kind of funny how full circle he founded himself in this CrossFit gym when he was doing an event in Scottsdale. And just how different the messages behind it, the identity and the intent, became blurry. And when you're just making people suffer for the sake of suffering, it gets away from what is the meaningful work. It's meaningless suffering. There's no real adaptation in mind. People are getting injured because their joints and tissues weren't prepared for that much volume, and it was just sloppy and silly and unprofessional. But that's CrossFit. People, especially in CrossFit, when guys can just essentially purchase the name, essentially, and open up their own gym, they can just take the programming and just vomit exercises. Anyone can throw 50, 40, 20, 30, 10, and add 3 exercises and go do it. That's how easy it can be. Squat, pull up, push up. I don't know. There you go. It's a great workout right there. But yeah, the identity became like exhaustion, and people are burnt out. The coaches were burnt out. The athletes, really good athletes, came to train at that gym at one time, and those athletes got injured and ruined their careers, and never did CrossFit again. And the person at the head essentially prided himself on how miserable and how hard the workouts were. It was just interesting. Proof that what he's saying is right. But there was no depth. It was just distraction. And I think skill requires patience. And it requires maturity. And in some regard, gentleness. If I'm teaching someone a full snatch, the gentleness is the the onboarding of what a snatch is and the breakdown and the technical efficiency of what a basic snatch is. Then I can implement rep schemes once I get that. But that requires a lot of patience and maturity and not forcing an athlete into a movement that's right or wrong for them. So, skill over suffering. How can you prevent yourself from meaningless suffering? Well, if I'm an artist, or that's a good example. If I want to draw things, I know, I don't do it, but I know there is some like techniques and some things that are just nuanced and very basic that you must learn first before you can go draw the portrait. But if you try to draw the portrait too fast, you'll find yourself erasing things for 9,000 times. And that's when the suffering becomes meaningless. And that's why skill is kind of the deter of what is meaningless suffering. It's meaningless suffering's kryptonite. Because if you would have had the basic skill and nuance behind it first, you would have prevented yourself from aimlessly drawing something and then having to erase it 9,000 times. In strength and conditioning, instead of, we'll say, sprinting, instead of just jumping right off the gun, especially if you haven't sprinted in a while, instead of sprinting right off the bat, maybe my first few weeks I'm doing skips, bounds, and low percentage effort strides to build a volume and intensity that is right for me. All these things. In business, even this podcast, my God, me right now. If I want to grow the thing, I need to learn the basic nuance of showing up. I need to show up and I need to learn how to set up my podcast day in and day out for a little bit, for a year or so. I need to get my listeners engaged. I need to write and make sure that I'm getting better at writing. I'm getting better at editing, and I'm getting better at setting this thing up in the mornings and waking up on time. If not, I get very stressed out and flustered. And I suffer. I sit here and stare at the screen for an hour and I'm like, what the hell do I do? Learning new skill can help prevent you from meaningless suffering. Usually skill is the answer. It's not avoidance. But the discrepancy and the thing that will get you past where you're at now is often going to be learning that new skill and then applying it. So I want you to ask yourself, is your training in particular, or whatever you're doing, your activity, is it making you better or is it making you more exhausted? Because that's important. Is it getting you closer to what is alignment? Do you feel like you come out feeling better in the end? And I have to ask myself this too, especially after a podcast on days like this when I'm sore and tired. Are you just surviving? Are you in control? Or are you just chasing chaos? Meaningless exhaustion. Is it providing you skills necessary for improvement? Whatever that looks like. Just talked about this with a friend at coffee, but the quote, aim who you can be and then aim single-mindedly at that. Well, imagine who you can be and then aim single-mindedly at that. Imagine who you can be and then think about it and then think about what you're doing now with your training and your skills and your arts and crafts or whatever hobby you're into. Is that helping you get closer with the skill acquisition to that person? If not, we're probably suffering. Because we're not getting any closer to ourselves, we're not getting any closer to who we want to be, and most won't benefit in the long run because people will benefit as you love yourself better and take care of yourself and get to a position in which that you're thriving so you have more to expend to other people and help them benefit. The ultra-endurance athletes out there. How long are their careers? Not long. Why? Because it's the chase of suffering, but meaningless. It's like at some point you need to turn around and face the shadow, right? Or you need to turn around and ask yourself, why am I suffering? What am I doing this for? It looks badass, and it is badass. I'm not saying it's not. But if it is for others to see you a certain way, it's meaningless suffering. There's no juice in that. There's no sustenance. Imagine who you can be and then aim single-mindedly at that and then build yourself with some precision and learn the skills required to get you there. Skill is what makes your strength useful. Skill is what keeps your progress sustainable. Skill transfers everywhere. So I guess when we leave here after this podcast, stop performing for the sake of exhaustion and pain. It's just to suffer. Suffering for the sake of suffering. Temporarily suffer for the sake of meaning and skill acquisition. And start practicing some self-control. This is buried in the bones, of course. And so, if we're talking about mind, movement, and meaning, when I get into the gym, for instance, if I have something new, I'm going to learn how to move specifically so I can get this skill or this joint function or this range of motion in order to get me closer to the end goal. And in that end goal, I improve as a person. And then usually when I do that as a person, I feel a little bit better about myself, and I'll feed myself the nutrition I need and the fuel that I need. Then I'm going to read a book, and I'm going to practice the skill of reading and writing, and then my soul is going to be nice and happy. But there is always the investment of time in order to get the skill, which will inevitably save you time and prevent meaningless suffering. So I hope this makes sense. Good training's out there. If you guys need a guy, well, you know who to talk to. That's me. So I could talk about this all day, but I won't. Guys, this was the Buried in the Bones podcast, episode 21, Skill Over Suffering. Man, it is necessary to temporarily suffer through meaningful work in order to get you the skills to prevent you from meaningless suffering down the road. And it can prevent a lot of pain and turmoil. And also, stop putting yourself in pain and stop exhausting yourself for the sake of what exactly? Guys, I'm out of here. Episode 21, Buried in the Bones. See ya.